Well, tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou, and a very warm welcome to everyone who's here in Chamber today and also tuning in online. Before we begin today, I wanted to briefly do some scene setting, but before I do, I'd like to ask for a volunteer to do our opening karakia. Would someone like to volunteer to do that? Thank you, Councillor Daniel.
Morena tātou, me nui tātou. He honore, he kororia, he maungarongo ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata, kia ake, amen.
Amen. Thank you for that, Councillor. The scene setting that I want to do is more for those who may be tuning in online to join us today, because I think it's important that we ground ourselves in the context of today's workshop. So just as a refresher, the government has made it clear that the structure for local government is changing, and that status quo, as we all now know, is not one of the options that is available to us through the process that we are now working through. Earlier this month, all 5 councils within Hawke's Bay had a paper come to them, as we did here in Hastings, and an agreement was made to sign an MOU to commit to exploring the opportunity to help shape that change through the government's Head Start pathway, rather than waiting for the government-led backstop pathway. And this decision was made across the whole region because if change is going to happen to us, I believe we all believe it's important that we understand the options, that we help test the consequences, and that we make sure the interests of our communities are represented as that future is shaped. Any Head Start proposal must meet government's criteria, and we need to be really clear on that. While there's been dialogue out there about government giving us a blank sheet of paper, we don't have a blank sheet of paper. We have very clear criteria from them. And that includes bringing together at least 2 territorial councils into one unitary authority. That is an absolute has to happen. And showing that the proposed model can simplify governance, improve delivery, achieve economies of scale, maintain local voice, and be practical to implement. And some of those things create real tension between the others. So in plain terms, a unitary authority would bring together the responsibilities currently split between district or city councils and the regional council. That doesn't mean that we've agreed to any particular model or outcome yet. It means that we have chosen to be part of the conversation and sit at the table rather than leaving it to others to determine the future and options for us here in Heretaunga Hastings. Today is one step in that process. Elected members, we have all been provided pre-reading for today's workshops, including the results of the first round of community engagement. So I hope everyone's had a chance to look at that. That feedback gives us an important starting point for today's conversation. It shows us how deeply our people care about the future of Heretaunga Hastings, how decisions, they care most about how decisions will be made, how services will be delivered, how local identity will be protected, and whether change will genuinely improve outcomes for our communities. And Gus will take us through that in more detail shortly. I want to thank everyone in our community who has taken the time to provide feedback. We had almost 700 submissions in just a 2-week period. That shows how deeply people care. And we've chosen to open and live stream today's workshop because this is an incredibly important conversation for our district and region as a whole. And our community should be able to see how it develops as we move through this process. The feedback is clear. People want practical answers and honest information about costs, savings, risks, and trade-offs. They want infrastructure and services delivered well. They want meaningful local voice and local identity protected, and they want further opportunities to contribute before any final proposal is settled on. So it's important to be clear about today's task and the purpose of this workshop. We are not making any final decisions today. As we know, that's not what workshops are for. The options before us are high level and they're about exploration. They're also a starting point. They're not exhaustive and they've not yet been fully assessed. The other options may emerge through today's discussion, which is why we're having this workshop. Further community and mana whenua engagement and analysis will undoubtedly still have to come. Our job today is to test whether the right options are on the table, whether the proposed outcomes and principles are the right ones, and what further information will be needed before elected members are asked to make decisions. A key part of that is agreeing the framework that we will use to assess options. So in plain speak, the framework is simply a set of questions that we agree each option will need to answer as the analysis develops. Will it make local government more affordable and sustainable? Will services and infrastructure be delivered well? Will communities still have meaningful influence over the decisions that will affect them? Will the costs, benefits and risks be fairly shared? And can the model actually be delivered? We will not have answers to those questions today, but those are the tests that we have to keep coming back to. Our task is to make sure these are the right questions to be asking, identify what evidence is still needed, and give clear direction for the assessment work that follows today. Elected members, those tests, and we will ultimately decide those tests and we will ultimately make the decisions. Staff and advisors, and I acknowledge Wayne Eagleson who's joining us online today, they will provide the evidence and analysis to support so that we can compare options fairly, understand the consequences and make informed choices on behalf of our communities. But those choices will ultimately be ours. That assessment, all importantly, will also need to reflect both our local priorities that we're hearing from our community, but also the government criteria. We must meet the government criteria for a proposal to be assessed and hopefully accepted if we choose to put one forward. And if Council ultimately does choose to submit an outline proposal, that will not be the final design or the final word. Further community and mana whenua engagement is part of that work ahead, and any proposal that progresses into detailed design must go through formal consultation with the community. Mana whenua engagement and treaty settlement arrangements will also require careful extra work. The government has been clear that existing settlement arrangements will need to be upheld and respected throughout this process. So it's not something that can be overlooked. We also need to be honest that every model that we look at will have trade-offs. The simpler structure may reduce duplication and cost, but it will need to demonstrate how local voice and service access are protected. A model with more local boards or delegated decision-making may provide stronger, more visible local representation, but it may also bring additional cost, complexity and processes. Those trade-offs are not a reason to avoid the conversation. Instead, they're the very reason we're having the conversation. So we are working to an incredibly tight government timeframe, as we all know, with any outline proposal due by the 9th of August. That means we need to move with haste, with purpose, but also that means not rushing the thinking or avoiding difficult questions. It's going to be a tricky tension. This is also a regional process. We can't forget that. Heretaunga Hastings must speak clearly for our communities, but we also have to work constructively and respectfully with our neighbours. No one council can design a workable region or future for our region alone. So today, I want to encourage all of you to test assumptions, to identify gaps, to question the evidence, and to focus on what any future arrangement would mean in practical terms for the people we serve. So our job is not to have everything settled today, team. It's to make sure that we're asking the right questions, to test those options that are put before us, and give the next stage of work a clear direction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to our Chief Executive just to give us a little bit more information, and then what we're going to do is Gus is going to take us through the community feedback that we've received so far, and at that point I will invite questions, not debate or comment, questions on the community feedback.
Thank you, Wendy, and good morning councillors. Lovely to see you all. Look, I will keep this brief, but the first point I wanted to make was just to ground this in the nature of the government's Head Start process, and As you know, there's a fairly clear direction from government's perspective for those councils that choose to participate in this voluntary process. The government is looking for proposals around some form of unitary council. And what it really means is that at a high level, the options are more limited, are just limited by the nature of that and the criteria that the government are going to assess any outline proposal against. And the government's preference is clearly for simpler arrangements with a strong focus on regional scale, efficiency, financial sustainability, and supporting the new planning system and being able to deliver services and infrastructure well over time. But it doesn't mean that there's only one way to think about this. There are still important choices for council, and those choices go to governance arrangements that could sit alongside any of those options. And what are the kind of principles that matter most in addition to the government's criteria in which you will want to assess those choices against? So today's discussion is not just about structure, it is about governance, it's about those principles so that you're informed about the criteria and the trade-offs that get made when it comes time to making a decision. As Mayor Wendy said, in practical terms, what we're suggesting for the workshop this morning is that we'll move first to Gus and just take us through the community feedback that we've had that's kind of important context for the conversation, and then move to Wayne to sort of work through those structure options, the governance choices, and then we'll kind of work out next steps from there. So with that, just to reinforce that today's purpose is not to land a decision. That's to come in mid-July and ultimately in early August if that's where the region lands in terms of wanting to put in an outline proposal. But with those brief opening comments, Your Worship, happy to hand over to Mr. Charteris.
Thank you, Chief, and through you, Mayor, and Morena councillors. Lynn, if you could load the slides for the public, that would be useful. So, once Lynn's ready there. Great, thank you. Just a couple of slides. You will have had an opportunity to read your pack, but for the benefit of the community who might be tuning in this morning, we thought we'd just capture the key elements of community feedback. So we had great feedback over the last couple of weeks. So about just over 680 submissions were received. 97% of those submissions live in our district. A keenness to stay engaged and up to date with the process. And importantly for this process, 67% were suggesting that they didn't have concerns about being part of a larger council, which is useful for thinking about our next steps. The overall message really was, and Mayor Wendy picked this up well, that if change is coming, our community is saying that they want practical evidence on cost, services, representation, local identity, and clarity on the trade-offs. So that's the mission ahead for all of us, and officers will support you on that. Next one. Thank you. Great. So in terms of what matters most to our community, again, Mayor Wendy picked up a lot of this, but maintaining and upgrading essential infrastructure and facilities came through really strongly, as did rates and costs as affordable as possible. So real clarity there around what is important to our community. And then obviously some important things, but at the next step down, and I won't go through them, you have the slides and we can pick up any questions and comments, and we'll make these slides available on the website too for anyone tuning in from the public. So for those, and as I said, 67% did not have concerns about being part of a larger council, but for the balance that did suggest that they had concerns, they were concerned that a new model would, it's the flip side of the concern around affordability. So concern that a bigger entity might increase rates and increase costs. And then a secondary concern was Hastings losing local voice or identity through that process. And again, some concerns around communication, consultation, council services. Mayor Wendy picked this up. How do we ensure that access to services is still going to be a critical part of the new model. So two insights from that. Local voice is really more than a number. So there are different ways of representing local voice. So it is linked to identity, access to services, responsiveness, rural and small community visibility and trust. So we'll work through that with you in the next stage. And the cost concerns, they obviously do relate to rates, they do relate to debt, transition costs, cost shifting, and whether savings can actually be delivered. So there's a bundle of related concerns in that cost part. Second to last slide, we asked what would give you confidence for the process as we move through this with the community. And so our community have said they do want clear information about cost savings, risks and trade-offs. They do want, me and Wendy picked this up, but the public is saying that they do want to have an opportunity to have a say before a final proposal is signed off. That may not be necessarily before the 9th of August, but through the detailed design, which will take subject to any decisions that might be made through this year. Many are also saying that they want some input into representation and then regular updates. So really the strongest signal is that nearly 9 in 10 said to keep clear information about cost savings, risks and trade-offs. That's what they're most keen to understand, and then slightly lesser level on input into representation. So some decent feedback for the next part of the process. So what I took out of that is we've talked about the evidence. So, and that's going to be I need to be upfront. That's going to be quite tricky because a lot of that evidence it resides in levels of detail that we won't be able to get to before the 9th of August. So we'll need to do our best at making some assumptions and being really clear about those assumptions with you about what we think the cost base might look like. So just heads up, some of these things are easy to say but tricky to do. I think this is a bit easier. The trade-offs up front, we can clarify where those trade-offs are, and Wendy's done a good job of flagging that already. I've talked about local voice having layers, and we'll work through that. People are keen to understand the services. They are wanting a credible process which we're designing, and clear feedback that mana whenua, we do need a separate process on mana whenua and treating that with care and respect. So some really useful feedback. So thank you to the community dialing in online. We appreciate it.
Thank you for that, Gus. And I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that during this initial feedback, we had something quite unprecedented happen to team, which was 67% of people who provided feedback asked to be kept up to date. So actively said, please email me and let me know what's happening next, which shows a high level of engagement. So I'd just like to open the floor. If anyone's got any questions on this initial round of community engagement, we have pre-circulated the information. Councillor Gibson.
Standing or sitting?
You can sit. It's a workshop.
Okay. That's nice, but it's kind of only one piece of the puzzle, and we've got to think regionally. I think in this whole thing, I'd be really interested to see what the other communities, because I from what I've heard, they have quite a different opinion to Hastings than perhaps Hastings people.
Through you, Chair, great question. So we received the Napier feedback overnight, which is really useful. So I'll just read you the. I've asked if we can share this with you. So if we can, I'd like to provide this to you because it's got some really useful information. But essentially, the open text comments were characterised by a strong focus on affordability, infrastructure, and value for money. So really consistent with what we heard from our community, alongside more varied and sometimes polarised views on governance, representation, and regional structure. So probably just a slight nuance there to some of the feedback that we have received. Many comments reflect trade-offs between these priorities, particularly between cost, efficiency, and maintaining local voice. While identity and cultural considerations were present, they were less prominent and more diverse in perspective. So that's just a really high-level summary of the Napier feedback. And as I suggest, I'll try and get you the detail. On CHB, I understand that they've had limited engagement to date with their survey. So as of yesterday, they'd only received 7 bits of feedback, so probably not enough to provide a broad picture of where their community sits. And Wairoa have just started their community consultation, and obviously Hawke's Bay Regional Council aren't part of the process. So that's as much information as I have that I can convey to you at this stage.
And I think there's definitely a place for us to be seeing what our neighbours' communities are saying, but we do also need to ground our thinking and decision making in what our community is asking us to do, given we're elected to represent Hastings at this stage. Alicia.
Sorry, just how many responses did Napier receive?
520.
Any other questions? Sorry, Councillor Corbyn.
Thank you. In Nigel's comments, he talked about this is about developing scale. What qualifies as sufficient scale in Hawke's Bay or for us? Is Hawke's Bay big enough? Should it be bigger? Does us in Central constitute scale? It's in land area it does, but population, not much.
We're testing the criteria there, Councillor.
Yeah, through you, Worship, and Gus, you might want to add to this as well. I mean, ultimately, it'll get down, the options will have to be assessed against both the government's criteria and any principles that we adopt, and there'll be some overlap between that. But it will get to things like obviously supporting the new planning system, catchment management comes into play. The new spatial plans will be done on current regional council boundaries. So there's lots of layers to this around, deliverability and those different criteria that this is going to have to be thought about, not just population or land area.
And through you, Chair, just to add to that, I mean, I think this gets to, it's a good question, it gets to, identify where there's potential duplication in the system, which could be removed, which then lowers costs. And in terms of the scale, at what point does that then become too big and too manageable? So you need to pick through that, identifying where you're doing things separately, where it doesn't really make sense given the size, and then there'll be a point where it becomes too large that you might need to do things. And separately, there will be some services that it actually makes sense to be providing locally, which may not be so impacted by those scale considerations.
I'm conscious that we're actually starting to stray a little bit into the next part of today's workshop, which is the presentation that Wayne's going to give us. I will come to Councillor Nixon, but if it's sort of heading down that road, I might ask you to hold the question.
Yeah, no, I'll start, and then if it's wrong,
absolutely.
just let me know, because I'm not sure when I should ask. I
No, that's all right.
research, but I don't know when to ask it.
Go for it.
Yeah, cost is obviously featured quite prominently all through the material that we've been given. And I've been interested in this for a long time now. I often wonder, if you look at other councils that might be compared with us, not Auckland, which I think is just so big it's in another category, but I look at Towering, I look at Dunedin and Palmerston, those sort of things. It seems to me that bigger does not seem to result in cheaper. Do we have information on that? Do we plan to do comparisons to try and understand why bigger has not actually resulted in more economy in some of these comparable areas?
Mr. Chadris?
Through you, Chair, again, a really good question. LGNZ, and again, we're happy to share the information. I think for many councillors, it's already been shared via the LGNZ Zoom. They've run a Zoom recently on the Auckland experience, and I think there are very real savings that have been identified in the Auckland experience. There have been very real areas where Auckland has decided to improve its infrastructure and do service delivery differently, which have then led to increased costs. So it's not a simple story. Absolutely big savings, then how they are offset by where you decide to do things differently because you are investing in the community in different ways, and actually the aggregate is where the costs fall.
So, thank you, Councillor Nixon. All right, I think now's probably a good time to hand over to Mr. Eggleston, who is going to take us through a presentation. And councillors, what I'll do is I'll ask us to hold questions until he reaches sort of natural break points, because I'm conscious he's trying to do this from online. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Councillor Ratcliffe, who is joining us online as well. He has a sick child today, so he's in the right place, but also doing his mahi from home. Welcome, Wayne.
Views around the options that are being put up. Are there options that we've missed? Noting some of the considerations that the Chief Executive's talked about. Really interested in some discussions around the high-level governance aspects that we're talking about here. And then thirdly, at a point during the presentation, Gus is going to take us through the draft Hawke's Bay principles, which kind of sit alongside the government's principles for assessing particular options, and it'll be really important to have a discussion on those things. So I think if we kind of work our way through this and then end up having a discussion on those three things, and of course anything that members may wish to raise, then I think hopefully that time will be well spent. So if we could move to the slide deck and perhaps just start with slide 2, if that's all right. Who has the joy of running it from your end?
We'll just get that brought up.
Perfect, thank you, Mayor Wendy. Jump on to the next one, fabulous. Perfect. So we've really covered the bulk of this, but I certainly wanted to mention from the point of view that both myself and Lawrence Yuill have been doing as advisors to the councils, that this information is very much exploratory only, and we don't see the options or the work as exhaustive. And particularly, we're very clear that at this stage, there's no question of committing councils to any particular model or outcome, or nor preempting any kind of council decisions. And I think Gus has already made the point that while there has been some initial public engagement and some very early mana whenua engagement, that work still needs to come. So a lot still to do. If we could just jump onto the next slide, please. Today, because of I think the focus around high-level reorganisation options and governance arrangements, we will cover off the Hawke's Bay specific draft principles, because they do help us kind of shape up the initial options. But the view is that we're just going to leave the proposed vision for another time at this point. We could just jump onto the next slide, which is the timeline. You've all seen this, so I really don't need to dwell on it, but it just highlights that this is obviously part of the process, but there's still quite a lot of work through to go. Can we maybe jump through to slide 8, please? Where are we? I think it's the next one. Yeah, so again, I don't want to dwell on this because both the Mayor and the Chief Executive have kind of highlighted this. When we've had initial discussions, both with yourself and the other councillors, and talked to some other stakeholders, while the government have made the point that they do want to have a broad conversation, it is, as the Mayor's rightly said, it's not a blank sheet of paper. They're very clear, and the Department of Internal Affairs have subsequently set out more information which kind of fleshes out these criteria. They are very clear that any proposal that's put in by the 9th of August on this under the Head Start proposal will have to meet these criteria. So they are pretty significant. And then, as the mayors have been very clear in their direction, there's a view that Hawke's Bay councils will consider options against a specific set of principles, which, as I say, Gus is going to come back to shortly. So if we could maybe jump to slide 11, please. This has already been mentioned, but I did want to just dwell on this briefly because it is important. The Chief Executive's made the point around the government's, strong preference, strong policy driver for scale and for a new unitary authority. And they've been very clear that it must provide for the amalgamation of at least 2 territorial authorities into a new unitary authority. And they're making the point that if a proposal was to come in that was for more than one unitary authority in a region, they'd really entertain that, if there's a sort of geographically large number of TAs and some complex issues. Now, they haven't gone into any more detail than that, but they certainly have highlighted the scale issue that the chief executives talked about. We can perhaps jump onto the next slide, please. So as a consequence, and it is really important, I think, to sort of start with option 4 on this, that this really is a decision for your council and other councils in the region to choose. The mayor, I think, eloquently made the point about wanting to be part of the conversation and wanting to sort of, drive the approach here to avoid, having other things done to you effectively, which is really the backstop approach. And I think that is part of the logic that the government are working on here. They're aware of the fact that it is a very tight timeframe. They're aware of the fact that it is pretty challenging to get through a lot of this work in that short period of time, but they're banking, I think, on the basis that local authorities will, in the end, make the judgment that it's better for them to determine their own future rather than the government. So on that basis, option 4 remains an option for you at any stage along this process up to the 9th of August and potentially beyond. But there are these 3 options that are there. And as I mentioned in my introductory comments, when we come back to discussion on this point, it would be useful, it would be very useful if members could give an indication as to whether they see there are potentially other options that could meet the government's criteria. We could just jump on to the next slide, please. There'll be, and Gus has, I think, made this point, there'll be different parts of the process and not all of it will be done today, but just wanting to be clear that there has been a lot of thinking done, both, I think, by elected members and by staff working to them, to try and say, there will be some decisions that could be made regionally, while others could be delegated to a more local level, whether it's local boards or what have you. So I'm not going to get into the particular aspects of the detail here, but again, this has been raised, I think, particularly by the chief executive. The questions of scale, questions of interdependency, and questions of community preference, which to some degree kind of come through your consultation process, are important here. We could jump onto the next slide, which I'm really only just going to flag. It's really just to highlight to members that some initial thinking has really been done, because the government have been very clear in this whole process about the fact that regional councils will no longer exist in a governance sense within a couple of years or so. So what could the balance between regional decision making and local decision making look like? You've got that in your pack, so I really don't want to dwell on it, but really just to highlight the fact that there are a number of options for you to look at. Then if we could jump through to slide 15, please, the next one. The particular point that I wanted to stress here, and Mayor Wendy and others were at the meeting not that long ago where Minister Watts visited Hawke's Bay, and he did stress the fact that innovative approaches outside of the current Local Government Act were possible. That he talked on several occasions about the potential for bespoke legislation. Now, my own view on that will be that because they have to look at this right across the country, the idea that somehow there would be 5, 10, 15, 20 different innovative approaches would seem unlikely. But I do think though that the council and the region shouldn't limit itself at this point. I think where there are innovative ways that can actually meet your district and your region's needs, and where they might require bespoke legislation, I think on the basis that a proposal is made under the Head Start process, then using that will be pretty useful. And if we can just jump onto the next slide, please, that'd be great. We might actually just go to the next one in terms of yeah, thank you. So there are some high-level governance issues for discussions here. You can see across this, and hopefully, you know, as has been mentioned by the Mayor and others, you've had this material for a few days. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to look at it and think about it from your own particular community's point of view and more regionally. There are a number of different ways to kind of, you know, look at this issue. And I think what the Minister and the Department of Internal Affairs have been clear is that they are looking for, as Nigel's talked about, they are looking for scale and they are looking for efficiencies and so on. But I think under the governance aspect, there are, you know, potentially a number of different options that could be talked about, and it'll be really useful, I think, to come back to that discussion shortly. We can maybe jump onto the next slide. Thank you. I'll beg your pardon, actually. Well, I'll leave that till the end, I think. Maybe at this point, Your Worship, if you're okay, can we go back to the slides relating to Hawke's Bay draft principles, which I think are slides 9 and 10. And if Gus could take us through those, then I think once he's done that, we'll be in a really useful position to throw it open for questions and discussion at that point. Gus, if you're able to take us through these.
Thank you, Wayne, and through you, Chair. So the reason that we have developed these is based on the conversations we have had with council tables as officials. We've realised that the government has provided a set of criteria which we must assess our options against, but it doesn't necessarily capture all of the things that we think are relevant to our district and region. So the proposal is that we have a second set of principles which will be assessed against the options alongside the government criteria. Now, there is some overlap, but for completeness, we wanted a complete set of principles as possible. And obviously, if there's overlap, we'll just be assessing at once. So I'll talk you through them. These are important. We can't do anything about the government criteria, but we do have some choices here. And the really critical thing for the next stage is that we have clarity on options and the governance options and the principles, because that's the recipe that we use for then doing the options analysis and then bringing that back for conversation with you. So we've clearly heard from our community, and clearly the conversations around this table have flagged that affordability and financial sustainability are absolutely critical. So that has to be baked in. There is this question of financial fairness and equity of funding. So when you talk to the community, they say, well, am I expected to pay for this when that service is that? And so that's something that we'll need to work through. That may be quite difficult to test in this first round, but it's important to have it there. And if we can't test it because we need a level of detail for later, then we can come back to it. That's my view. We may be able to test it. Effective local voice and decision-making with place-based decisions made as close to the place as possible. So that is something that we've been hearing. Again, we're testing that with you. Preserving local service access is, again, something we've heard around the tables and has come out in the community consultation. Clearly improving the effectiveness and efficiency of delivery capability is something that we all hold dear. That's why we get up in the morning. That's what your focus is on governance, on governance in many situations. So, then if you move to the next one, this is in part baked into the government criteria, but environmental catchment coherence. So actually, you know, if we're moving to a system which makes sense, then how do we think about that from a land and an environmental perspective? Respecting and maintaining Te Tiriti and mana whenua and settlement arrangements. The Mayor has referenced this. It's come through strongly in our engagement with mana whenua. It's important. Clearly, transition deliverability and organisational capability, that is also in the government criteria. Decision-making for long-term outcomes. So rather than building a system for now, how are we building a system for our future generations and based around outcomes rather than political sensitivities? And then recognising regional strengths by enabling working together. So we've had some critical success through the cyclone and working together as a region, particularly in engaging with central government and speaking with one voice. How do we ensure that that is a baked-in part of the new system? So those were some of our thoughts, and we're really keen to hear your feedback on those because they're going to be important for us in testing.
Thanks, Gus.
Over to you, Wayne.
Thank you. I was just going to briefly make one more comment and then perhaps hand back to the chair to have discussion and stuff. But I really just wanted to make the point, and it's already been reinforced by others, is that if you go through these draft principles and if you look at the options that are already on the table, and as I say, potentially opened, there'll be others that'll come up in the course of the conversation, is that there really are going to be trade-offs for elected members to consider and make. There are, and some of those trade-offs, will potentially be quite difficult conversations. But as the Mayor mentioned in her opening, that almost makes it all the more important to have those discussions kind of relatively early up in the next little while. So I hope that in the conversation that now happens over the next little while, there'll be some focus on that. So, Your Worship, perhaps I could hand back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Eagleson. Okay, unless we need it, let's take the presentation down. That way we can see you, Wayne. Okay, councillors, I'm going to open the floor for questions. We've got presented to us some high-level options and some principles based on all the discussions so far, the government's criteria, and to a degree community feedback received so far, although that will form things up more. So I'm just interested in questions around that. Remember, we're not making any decisions today. If you think there are options that are missing, please, by all means, ask the high-level questions around it, and we'll go from there. Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Yep, thank you, and through your worship. At the DIA Zoom on Friday morning, the officer concerned alluded to the government, as you espoused, wanted scale. So, but they didn't define that scale. So according to Ms. Google, Hawke's Bay is 9th population, I think 9th biggest population by size for a region. So if that's the case, we've kind of far down the ranking. So in terms of option 2, how much of a steer do we know whether that is a viable way to go in terms of to the government's direction? Because to me, they haven't clearly defined what is a big area. So any thoughts on that as a question, through your worship?
Welcome to our Chief Executive, first of all.
Yeah, through you, Chair. They haven't been definitive, but certainly when they've used examples of, and I think they alluded to it, regions that have large populations and a large number of territorial authorities. They've never used Hawke's Bay as an example for that. It's been Canterbury, with 11 territorial authorities, or Waikato and Bay of Plenty. So I think the kind of steer from DIA, I don't think Hawke's Bay is seen in that context.
Yep. So just to clarify through your worship, so they probably wouldn't see Hawke's Bay in the scale that they're talking about for multiple or 2 unitary authorities, in your opinion, or
whilst they haven't been definitive on the guidance.
Yep.
I think that's
Yep.
certainly not the steer that we've had from the examples that have been used.
Sure. And a follow-up, if you like,
Please.
your worship. So in terms of option 3, the DIA also said that it is possible if another territorial authority does not want to join in part of a proposal, you can put them in anyway. So in other words, you don't have to give them permission to get married to them. Well, not quite like that. Sorry, live stream people.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Deputy Mayor. I think certainly the preference across the region is hopefully we can all hold hands and step forward together. So we'll definitely be looking at that as the preference, but you highlight a valid point. I'll come now to Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, thank you, Bishop. I'm particularly interested in the second one on the list, financial fairness and equity of funding. And I came with this question as well.
Right.
After the cyclone, Hastings ended up with a significant cost for reconstruction and recovery. Because the rural areas were essentially part of Hastings, but actually the benefits of that would extend over the whole region, which obviously includes Napier, which has not really contributed much to this particular area. So, will this be part of our sort of thinking? I suppose the best way to put it. I've already thought about it, but I don't know what.
No, that's fair. Mr. Shadows?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yes, it will have to. It won't have to be honest. It's probably not going to be done as this first phase of work before 9th of August because you get quite complicated quite quickly. But how we deal with debt, different rating differentials and things, that is clearly really complex work that we'll need to step through. And there are some options there. There are, obviously, we've got what it looks like now, through to some transition to a different model, through to, having different parts or harmonisation depending on the services. So there's loads of options there and it gets quite complex, but we'll need to step through that for sure.
That'll do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. I'll come now to Councillor Gibson.
I've got a couple of questions and observations, I guess.
We'll stick to questions at the moment.
Cool, okay. Again, thinking regionally, because this is the whole purpose of this, is what's best for the region. So I'm trying to stick to what's best for the region. But the Wairoa, for example, is 70% Māori, and Ngāti Kahungunu, I understand. Well, I think naturally we were thinking that perhaps they could go north, but given the Tūhoe and Ngāti Porou up in East Coast, it's quite difficult for them. It's not just geography. There's other aspects that will make it difficult for them to go north. So while it's easier to come south, but geographically it's harder. So what are your thoughts on have you had feedback from Wairoa along that line?
Through you, Chair, look, I can't speak to Wairoa specific conversations. I think we can see with our own eyes how difficult that is for that community in thinking about how they meet their needs, and they do genuinely feel like they are straddling two districts because they've got catchment and emergency management related connections north. They've got economic and iwi based connections south, and so therein lies the difficulty of their conversation. And all I can say at the moment is we can see it. It's a tricky one, and at the moment we'll just try and work through it together, but it's tricky. Yeah,
so the question around that is, can they go alone without going north or south? Is that an option?
Well, only in the sense, I guess the government's criteria through UG is pretty clear. The outline proposals through the Head Start process has to be a minimum of 2 councils coming together. Tairawhiti is already a unitary authority, so those are all the sorts of dynamics that need to be worked through. But my read of the fairly clear guidance from central government is Wairoa going alone wouldn't meet the criteria that's been established.
And the second question, is costs attributed with these options? Is following up from what Deputy Mayor Fowler said, that option 2 is really can't even be a flyer because it's just changing some boundaries and it's not increasing the size population of the south. Going with CHB because you'd lose 15,000 and gain 15,000. So I'd like to see some costs and some numbers of councillors, and we haven't seen the numbers of councillors that are on the table, like Mayor and 12, for example, and then the governance pool of around 3 million when you're looking regionally, and can that be shrunk down and ensure when it is that so the community can see some real savings, and likewise with CEOs 5 down to 1 and group managers from 50 odd down to 10 odd.
So I'll come to the officers and say, can you talk to when that type of detail is going to be available in this process, given we've got a 9th of August deadline?
Absolutely. Look, it's a really good question and fundamental to articulating the cost. Obviously, we can't determine what costs are going to look like for services in the future, but one of the things we can have clarity around is the governance and executive related costs, so we can make some assumptions about that. For the options assessment, all we need is difference, a genuine difference between the options, because we'll be able to say, well, that one's more high cost than that one, and that one's low cost, and that's how it represents through the options development. We can say, well, we can put 10 as a starting point on it with a circle around it, and then that's the conversation with on the detailed design that would come after that. But for options analysis, to give you clarity on where there is genuine difference and trade-offs, we can just say this one's higher cost because it's going to have more governance or more local representation versus less, and we can give you some broad numbers.
The level of detail you're referring to, Councillor Gibson, is after the Head Start process. So the government's been very clear, they want a high level, very high level proposal put forward with high level indications of how things will work. They have been clear they don't expect all the detail within 3 months because it's not realistic. They will then assess whether it meets their criteria, and then if it does, we're given a period of time after that to do all the detail you're speaking of. And then that will result in further community consultation too, because especially around representation, our community will want to weigh in. So I'll come now to Councillor Milmine.
Thank you, through your worship. So first off, I think that it looks to me like these principles have captured most of what you've talked about with the community feedback. So thank you. Just wondering how each option will be tested against these principles and the criteria from government.
Good question. So we've the officials group has created some collateral to support that, and in simple terms, you've got your options as along one side, and you've got your criteria at the top, and then you're making an assessment against first the government criteria, whether it meets, not, or whether it, between 1 and 5, whether it's strong or not, and then we'll then move to the Hawke's Bay principles and assess them. We'll have some weightings that guide that, which we'll be absolutely transparent with you on, and we can test that. There will be the ability to go back and tweak that if we feel as though that is not right. And so that is one of the things we're thinking about, is that becomes quite a big spreadsheet and quite complex. How do we then transmit that to you so you've got a feel for that? So that's something that we're working on right now. But in simple cases, it's just options, all the criteria, assessing each one against those, some weighting, and then you will come with some general score and relativities, and that's the conversation.
Excellent, thank you. So would that come back to us at one of these future workshops?
Absolutely.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Milmine. I'll come now to Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Worship. Again, looking and thinking about option 2. I mean, this is about local government amalgamation, and I can't understand how, if we split Hastings and Napier, which are the 2 major regional population areas separated by a couple of grazing paddocks and a river, how on earth that ever meets the criteria of what central government is trying to do. So I was interested in your questions to try and tease that out a little bit, Michael. So that sort of sets me on a course. In terms of government guidance, it talks about affordability, but at nowhere do we ever say this is going to cost less. And what are our people telling us at the moment? They're up against the wall now with rates, and there we have this proposal, and people say, wow, this might be the saviour, we're going to pay less, but nowhere do I see this is going to cost less. Have you got any comments on that? Either from the government side, I don't see it, and I don't see it.
Through Chair, great question. That is the decisions that you make around the table. Those are the decisions that you'll be making through the LTB process. They go to what council does, what it provides, and the level of service it provides. So that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of the cost. So this process will be able to provide a structure, how many governance, and the kind of executive leadership that you might think, but it doesn't go to where the real costs sit in the system, which is what you provide, how much you're paying, level of service. So that's where those LTP conversations become absolutely critical for here, and then for the any eventual new entity.
Okay, I'll come now to Councillor Daniel.
Thank you, Your Worship. Given that consultation with mana whenua is ongoing, how will mana whenua and treaty settlements be handled as a separate work stream?
Thank you, councillor. So we are engaging, so we had a workshop with mana whenua last week. We've undertaken to continue to engage through the process. We'll have a conversation like this with mana whenua after each of the workshops, and we'll work through that together. So I can't answer exactly how we'll be able to resolve matters, but we've got a good process in place and a real genuine engagement on both sides.
Okay, kapa, just a follow-up question, well, a separate question. I was just reading the draft principles around respecting and maintaining te tiriti and mana whenua and settlement arrangements, and then it says, test whether iwi Māori participation, existing agreements and settlement obligations are protected. So we're testing to see if they're protected. If we find out that there are certain provisions within the settlement that are not protected, how will we ensure that those are protected?
Through you, Chair, I think the starting point, and the government's been very clear, is that existing treaty settlements have to be protected. That's the starting point. And I guess we've got engagements happening at two levels. TKO have organised themselves in a way that we kind of got that aligned regionally, where we're at a governance and chief executive level. We've got TKO reps involved and actively involved in both the mayoral forum, the chief executives group and the working group. But we're also been really, really clear, the message from mana whenua is that's fantastic, and fantastic that TKO have organised themselves to do that, but you also need to directly engage with us, and that's the commitment that we've made.
Councillor Teo Skipworth.
Yeah, just following on from that, I've got two questions, but kind of feels like a bright light test, but who's that bright light that's tested it in regards to mana whenua? Because the government's ability to straddle between the treaty and te tiriti is the biggest concern for Māori. So just want to wish you all the best for that. I think my question is, what's the confidence, and this is almost like how long's a piece of string, but I just want to flag it. What's the confidence in bringing indicative financial numbers in regards to being cost effective when we currently have the local Waters Done Well transitions, the current makeup of the regional councils being no longer, and bringing all the considered partners' numbers together in all the different, I think it was 5 options, or four options, together, and then the ability to provide all of that when we are moving at pace that is trying to meet an election race.
Through you, Chair, I'll start. And I think heading into the 9th of August and the decision that council tables need to make around whether to submit an outline proposal by its nature is going to be high level and based on some assumptions, and we'll go to assumptions around governance, executive. To get through that first gate, the real work around doing the financial modelling will come through the period till March next year when final proposals
That's good, because I just didn't want us to put out that we're going to have everything sorted by that August the 9th, because we've got the community watching. No. But I empathise with all of you because there's so much to pull together, and just so we can manage expectations or not, we need to be talking about what we can bring together and what we can't.
Thank you,
Through you,
Councillor.
Chair.
Yes, and sorry, I'll come to you in just one moment, Wayne. Councillors, because we've got people on Zoom, everyone needs to turn off their microphone so there's not feedback for Wayne. I've noted your names and I will come to you in order. Over to you, Wayne.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Look, just briefly on that point, I think one thing that we've picked up both from the Minister and from DIA officials, that it very much, in that sort of post-9 August period through to sort of March, April next year, it very much is a conversation. So if you think about the process for a moment, your council and other councils in the region have to make a decision by the 9th of August. If you do decide to go in, then Cabinet will make initial decisions on September about which ones to kind of progress. And then there is this period through to April next year, because Councillor, I think you've raised a really important question, and the Minister's been very clear that the government won't expect, very, huge amount of detailed financial modelling and so on. There is that time to then do the work afterwards in a slightly fuller time frame. So I think you can have confidence that there is a period of time in which this work can be done.
Just follow up if I may quickly. I think for me, it's the setting a level of expectation for our community that we could be signing up to something and they don't have it's almost like buying a mortgage and then wondering how much your interest rate's going to be after. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, before I come to everyone else in order, Councillor Ratcliffe has actually had his hand up online for some time, so I'm coming to him now. So, Councillor Ratcliffe, can you hear us and what is your question?
Kia ora tātou, can you hear me, can you see me?
We can, thank you.
Fab. Yeah, I've got 2 or 3 questions here, mainly for Wayne, I reckon. One regarding the backstop option and another regarding citizens' assemblies as part of an option. So would the backstop option prescribe governance and representation arrangements, or will it just prescribe which councils must amalgamate? Shall I read out my questions and then turn my mic back off?
You've had
Sure,
the nod
that
from
works,
Wayne.
yep.
Okay, cool. Wayne can probably see my questions in the chat anyway. So for everyone else's benefit, question 2 is, have citizens' assemblies been considered as part of any of the governance or representation models? Would they count as an advisory group under governance option E, or would they be considered an innovative approach? And the third question was regarding option 2, the north-south split, which to my mind seems to be incompatible with either the environmental and catchment coherence objective or recognising the mana whenua of Ngāti Kahungunu, as Councillor Gibson alluded to in the Wairoa context, but yeah, thinking more of a Hastings context. So those are my questions. Wayne can see them. I'll turn my mic back off. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. On the first point, in terms of citizens' assemblies, no, that hasn't been raised with us previously. Would that be seen as a potentially innovative solution? The answer is yes. You'll all be aware of government announcements in a different context around only having elected members, getting votes and stuff, but whether they could be used in an advisory sense around kind of providing some more local voice is a matter that could well be explored. So if councillors wish that to be put on the table, that's really a matter for them. On the second point around the north-south, the 2 unitaries, whether that would be incompatible and so on, I think that actually goes right to the heart of some of the questions you're looking at. There are a number of options that are on the table, and as the Mayor highlighted earlier on, and we've talked about, part of the process of part of the role, if you like, of this workshop is to kind of tease out, the advantages, the disadvantage, whether any of these options should be on the table, off the table, and so on. And so some of the things you talk about, Councillor, I think go to the heart of that issue. I mean, in the end, there's a broader political point, and this perhaps also comes back to a question that was made earlier around what the government might accept. I mean, this is a highly political process, both locally, regionally, and also nationally. So that the government will have to take a political lens to this as well. And if there is a strong proposal from a region in a particular area, that will have a degree of influence as well. I think in terms of the backstop point, that really just, while it's a potentially legitimate decision for councils and regions to take, in the end, what it does is leave it to central government a little later on in the process, sort of 2027-28, to determine what should happen to your district and region. So I think it's literally that, it's a backstop where the government gives itself the capacity to decide what might happen if regions haven't led their own proposals.
I'll just check before I come to the other speakers I've got on my list, whether or not that answered all your questions. Councillor Ratcliffe, do you have any follow-up?
No, that's pretty much, yeah, thanks. So the citizens' assemblies could be considered as an advisory group. the north-south split, that is remains a question for us to discuss. And my understanding of that last point about the backstop option there was that it's not clear how prescriptive the backstop option would be. It would definitely include which councils would have to amalgamate, but it would be a risk to choose that option and expect to have input in how to design the governance and representation arrangements. Is that about right?
Through you, Chair, yes, I think the very essence of the backstop option is that you effectively lose a good degree of influence over what might happen in a year or 2 or 3 years' time. And it's effectively central government then saying, well, if councils and regions don't put a proposal in that they're then prepared to discuss with officials and ministers, then they'll effectively design what the future might look like. And look, we don't know because, I mean, obviously this is all going to go through a general election process and so on. So, none of us have got crystal balls to determine, what makeup of future governments might look like, who might be minister, what their thinking might be on it. But at this stage, at least, and I think the chief executive made the point well earlier in his initial comments about the backstop, it's pretty black and white. It's effectively central government taking to itself the power to decide what would happen.
Right. Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you, team. So I'll now ask, as I call out your name, can you please turn on your light? Because I'll put you back in the speaking order you were in. So Deputy Mayor Fowler, Councillor Milmine, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Nixon. From this point, anyone else can choose to turn on their light. Councillor Nixon, did you have a question? Cool. Okay, so I'll come first to Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Yep, thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Obviously, past August, as Councillor Skipworth alluded to and others alluded to, there's quite a bit of work. Has this been budgeted for?
Through you, Chair, insofar as the decisions that council have made to put some of the reader funding alongside other councils into the interim regional office to continue to be able to have the capacity to coordinate the work, and then the other resourcing we have to clearly just make time available from within the resource we have.
Thank you. So through Your Worship, the DIA official on Friday indicated that if a region put forward a budget for funding this, the government may be receptive. So I'd like to do an action for us to to save the ratepayers' money, even though it is reader money, it could be used for other purposes. I'd like for an action for us to get a budget together to present with our proposal through Your Worship, if that's agreeable.
That is duly noted. My great hope is that DIA is correct. Ministers have said something quite different, but we will see how things play out. It is worth trying. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Fowler. I'll come now to Councillor Milmine.
Thank you. Through you, Worship. I'm just wondering if we have thought about how Local Water Done Well or the Hawke's Bay entity would fit within this structure, and if there is still an opportunity before 1st July 2027 to set that governance, so somehow there is alignment.
Yeah, it's probably something we'll need to take away, given we're in the full throes this week of the company being incorporated and gearing to have all of that up and running on the 1st of July next year.
Or even just the governance side of it. I know that I wouldn't try and change the entity or what that is, but just to align with a structure. I don't know. Yeah.
I think the reflection I can give is this issue was very much raised direct with ministers by mayors at a recent rural and provincial meeting, and the minister himself admitted that perhaps this has been the wrong way around, but it is what it is. And we have legislative timeframes we have to meet in terms of the water entity, so I suspect it's a body of work that's going to have to be addressed by whatever the new entity is, unfortunately. You're right, though, in a perfect situation, the two would align beautifully and have the timing to do so.
Thank you. I've got another question, if that's right. So I just wonder if we can, I think it would be really important for the community to understand risks and deliverability, transitional kind of things. So if possible, at the high level, before we go to community, if we could just, highlight those, that would be appreciated.
It's a great point. Thank you, Councillor. I'll come now to Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Bishop. Costs, we'll start off with the two issues the community have is the costs and the representation. That comes as no surprise, and I would imagine CHB and Napier are pretty much aligned with that, and perhaps in Wairoa. So going back to that, if any council, I think we need to go with some numbers. The community need to know what the structures look like. I know you're saying we leave that to later, but I think they need to know number of councillors, even a starting point. And essentially, it'll be 2/3 of the councillors will be Hastings and Napier if we go with a larger amalgamation. And then there's this discussion of community boards. So if we're going to ring fence debt, like Hastings is $500 million, because that's the concerns of the other councils, are we also going to ring fence the costs of these community boards? Because the community boards, it won't be required in Hastings and Napier because they'll have such a larger representation, but the likes of CHB, coastal communities, if they want to have these boards, they will come with a cost. And is it fair that those costs, where those costs should lie? And so there's essentially consequences with actions, and I think the people need to know those cost consequences of whatever we decide.
You're raising important questions, Councillor. So, I mean, yeah.
Well, and you're absolutely right, and it goes to the question that Councillor Nixon, those are the tricky things that we'll need to work with in longer time, because those equity considerations and how people perceive fairness in terms of the costs and what they bear, that's important.
Okay, I'll come to Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, Councillor Gibson almost asked the question I wanted to ask. Is there, I've had to change it slightly because it's sort of covered part of it. What evidence is there, or are we going to do some work to see what effect on costs the change of representation might happen? And I'm thinking really of community boards and local boards and all the rest of it, because we only have a rural community board. But when I look at Auckland, there seems to be, they're like mini councils, and I suspect they drive their own budgets. They drive, they have a big impact on the main council because they're submitting to that. So do we have any sort of understanding, or are we going to try and find an understanding of the effect that these lesser boards have on the main council finances? That's question one.
And I'll come to the officers, but I'll just touch on again what I said at the start, that these are the trade-offs we're going to have to weigh as a region. Simplified structure will mean lower costs and less duplication, 100%. But also that doesn't address what our community is also asking for, which is representation and local voice. So this is the balance we're going to have to work with our community on, and we will have views around this table if you look at any one of those criteria in isolation. The challenge is our community sending a clear message to us, as is government with their criteria, that we've got to make these conflicting criteria work. We can't just look at any one in isolation. So anyway, I'll come to the officers.
Well, I think you covered that pretty well, Your Worship, because those are the trade-offs from a simplified governance structure that is a mayor and X number of councillors versus that plus any manner of community or local boards, and those are where you'll have to consider your trade-offs between the benefits of local voice versus the cost of that, deliverability, servicing, the administrative efficiency of all of that. Those become the applied trade-offs in those choices.
And through you, Chair, yes, it will be absolutely possible to make some assumptions around how many regional councillors, how many local board members and different options and things, and what we expect them to be paid in order to get an aggregate amount so that we can compare it against the current system, so that we can say something about whether it is cheaper, more expensive, etc. So we just need to make some assumptions around that, test that with you, and then through detailed design, then you would obviously land that work.
I'm not taking a position or anything. I'm
No,
just
it's a good
trying
question.
to give warning of what I might be thinking. I've got another question unrelated to that, and that is, I looked through the decision-making lists. Presumably, because I saw one or two of there, I thought they were in the wrong category, but presumably we're going to go through those at some stage. Is that right? We'll all have a bit of a say what should be in, what shouldn't be in. Yeah.
So this is the slides in the pack around local and regional.
It's a bit
decision-making.
further down.
So
Yes, absolutely. So, I need to be honest, I think as officials, we haven't turned our mind to exactly when we have that conversation with you. But when we talk about local boards, there are clearly some options around being advisory at the lighter end versus decision making. And if they're decision making, then we need to turn our minds to, well, what are they making decisions on, and do they have budgetary authority? And that could be as far as rating, a delegated rating authority for certain areas. So there's a big spectrum there of power and decision making that you could give those boards, and that's what we'll need to work through with you.
That's the sort of answer I was looking for.
Before I come on to the next speaker, I think something that I'm interested in understanding at the right time, so just something to be taken away, is a conversation's already been raised, and I know it's banging around regionally around things like ring fencing in particular, and I'm just interested to test that against the government's criteria in terms of affordability, because the more you ring fence, actually, the less you get economies of scale, the less affordable you get. So I'm just interested in whatever comes to us being tested against that. Not saying I'm opposed to it necessarily, the criteria needs to be tested.
I think through you, Chair, Mayor, you raised a really good point, and that's one of the critical trade-offs. The more, in my view, and we'll test this and we'll continue to have this conversation, the more you try and lock things down, the harder you make a regional entity to be able to balance things across the general population. And so it's going to make it that beast quite hard to seek efficiencies from, to drive costs out of, to do things differently if you want to do things differently. But what you are is buying is baking in local voice and decision making. So that is a really critical trade-off, right? And what the government is saying is that it wants us, it's seeing the problem definition is that it's seeing that people aren't making hard decisions to drive efficiency, and it's kind of driving toward that. And you might have different views on whether that's the right thing to do, but that's what it's trying to drive toward. So that is a key tension in the system.
And I guess just expanding on that point, the thing I'm interested to understand is the government is mandating amalgamation. If we ring fence into previously existed territorial authorities, does that meet the criteria? Because we're essentially still independent, albeit one entity. So I'm just interested in that test, please. So I'll come now to Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Worship. I think Simon actually answered my question around local governments, but this first question I want is really around efficiencies, and you briefed on it just now, but how do we define each option being more efficient than the other? And I guess, can we measure that? And how do we measure that? And do we have time to measure that?
That last question in particular is very important.
To be blunt, we can't really, all we can measure is how the structural options themselves then either reduce or increase costs through headcount in terms of governing and managing that. As I said before, the real cost, the efficiencies are the decisions you make around this table, and we can't predetermine that. What we would need to say is that a new governance table is not going to do a whole lot of things, or is going to reduce services or not invest in this, and that's not something this process can predetermine or assume.
Excellent. I'll come now to Councillor Lorcan.
Yes, thank you, and through your worship, I have two questions. My first one is with regards to whether it's the backstop method or whether we're part of the Head Start system, where membership in LGNZ sits in all this. So if a body decides to not do anything and wait for central government to dictate, I'm assuming central government is going to say, right, well, this is your system and we don't want you to be a member of LGNZ, which is effectively the body that kind of protects and advocates and guides and represents local governments, like our councils. So I'm assuming, backstop, no more LGNZ membership. If they are...
Should we test that first?
Yeah, I'd like to know, and I'd like to know whether if we go with the Head Start system, what will, they do have to approve whichever Head Start, amalgamation group we decide on, or system what is our LGNZ representation within that?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, my starting point is I don't think the government would get to that level of direction. They'll, as Wayne said, the risk with the backstop process is government determines the shape and just have less influence over that. Don't think they'd get down to directing then whatever entity, what position they need to have on whether they're a member of LGNZ or not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Wayne. You're great. Okay. And just one more question. So with regard to the major infrastructure projects, our road and bridge rebuilds that are underway post-cyclone, and they're not due to be completed until 2029 is our kind of deadline for there. So Cabinet's going to decide in May 2027, the proposals are all going to be implemented, the legislation will be enacted between then and the local body elections in October 2028. So where will the balances of kind of debt and expenditure sit for those projects across the populations of a new entity in terms of the ratings impact and equity for that year and subsequent years?
All things are going to, through you, Your Worship, have to be worked through in terms of transitions, if that's where we end up in terms of.
So that's all the detail that will come if a high-level proposal is approved. All of that. And we've just seen what a huge body of work it is, and we're just starting blocks of transitioning Three Waters. So, yeah, huge undertaking. And I think that's why as well, my reflection is certainly when I look at other amalgamations, and I've been having some honest conversations with constituents recently, I've asked the question, generally in the short term, when there's amalgamation, there's not huge cost savings because there's cost associated with that transition. We've seen that ourselves with Three Waters. So there are things absolutely that suddenly get cut immediately, but there are other things that are new costs. And in the short term, that is a very real thing we have to think about. In the long term, though, that's where you see the economies of scale. So it's just about those honest conversations with our community, and that lends itself nicely, I think, to Kev's point earlier where he was saying he's not hearing that savings dialogue, and that's because the reality is amalgamation is a cost in its own right. Do we have any other questions, team? I see there's no lights on at the moment. I'm sorry, Keith.
Just a very quick comment in terms of local representation. I'm inclined to say to them, our soul is not for sale. That's it.
Thank you. And I'm just checking to make sure. Councillor Ratcliffe, did you have a question? I just want to make sure you're having an opportunity to speak if you've got anything else you wanted to ask.
Yeah, thank you. I've just asked Wayne in the chat if we can have some, this might be a question for Gus though, if we can have some examples of which options existing unitary authorities around the country correspond to, like is Tairāwhiti an option A, is Auckland an option C, just to help us picture it a little bit, without predetermining us.
Good point. Yeah, we can definitely get some work done for you on that.
Awesome, thank you.
And I think that dovetails quite nicely into a question I have to Councillor Ratcliffe, so thank you for that, which is just understanding what models have been successful elsewhere in the country through this process and lessons we can take away as well, their learnings. Like I know that earlier Mr Charteris was reflecting on the Auckland learnings. There were, I'm sure, pluses and minuses, so I'm really keen to make sure that as we look at this process, and particularly as we move into the detail, we're not just trying to do everything from scratch, as I'm sure no one is trying to do, and that we're taking away those lessons from other areas who have been on this journey. A question from me as well. I'm just really interested to understand, team, how our community feedback that we've received so far, but will receive more of, will be reflected in the option analysis.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we can have confidence that that the principles that we have developed actually capture the key elements of the community feedback. So obviously the principles were developed at the same time as the community feedback, but having reflected on that feedback, I haven't seen anything that's missing in the principles. So that is the expression. Those principles are important because they are the expression of what our community has said is important. So that is baked in. And we'll take it offline to, I think we have it's on us to go back to the community saying we've heard from you, these are the things we've heard. So we can certainly square that circle as well.
Thank you for that. And team, I'd like to hone us in for a moment and just make sure that everyone's really had a look at those slides 9 and 10, which are the draft principles, because really this is going to be the guiding star for the work going forward. So if there's anything that you feel is missing, that you want to test more, I'd really like to hear that now. We don't have time to sort of sit and marinate, as Councillor O'Keefe likes to say, for an extended period on this. The team needs guidance. So from all the information they've heard from us so far across the region, not just from us, and from community feedback thus far, this is the draft principles. Is there anything missing? Is there anything you'd like to test? I'll give you a moment to just reflect on that while I ask another question, which is, team, I'd like to understand, I'm really conscious that in the conversations with other regions' mayors so far, particularly Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa, there is a real concern that if there is a very simplified unitary authority, their representation will be completely muted. That is a stumbling block for amalgamation if we cannot overcome that. And I'm really interested to understand what options may exist to ensure adequate representation for those communities. I'm also thinking of our coastal communities while I think of that, and our own rural communities. When I look at traditional representation reviews and the mathematics and methodology that is mandated to be used under that, I could see very quickly us coming together, and particularly a one unitary authority, that our rural voice, our coastal voice, and our neighbours' voices could be lost. And I would really like to understand, if not today, in a future workshop, how that could be addressed. This is about fairness across the region. Thank you. Okay, so I'll come now to Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Worship. I think the thing I really want to know is what are the other councils saying about this. I want to know what their opinions are matched up against ours so that we can see the differences, the similarities. I think it will make the process just, I want to know.
And fortunately, Councillor Nixon, I believe on Thursday, Napier will be live streaming their workshop, so you can tune in and actually watch that at your leisure. And I know that the team will be pulling this together too.
So we'll have a good sense through you, Your Worship, of that towards the end of the week. Wairoa meeting today, we're meeting, Napier and Central Hawke's Bay meeting on Tuesday, and Chief Executives and reference group and advisors getting together on Friday morning. So we'll have that picture by the end of the week.
I'm sure we all want to know anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a regional conversation. You're absolutely right, Councillor. Councillor Montepere-Henry.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I would just really like to see the feedback because we represent everyone, and I think a high level sample doesn't sort of give us the real flavour for what's being put forward. Thank you.
Just for clarity, so you want all of our feedback? You want the raw data?
Sorry, no, just the ratepayers' feedback. Like, you know, when everyone consults, normally we read it all and see it all, so we can understand what their thoughts were when they put pen to paper, but we're only getting this very small snapshot of 700 people's opinions.
Yeah, so just to be clear, that is in a very large Excel file because it was mostly online. So you'll want to see the online. You want an Excel file with the okay.
If it's easy to do.
We'll see if we can get that uploaded to the hub.
We'll anonymise so that we're protecting people's private information, and yeah, we can make that available to you, no problems.
Thank you. Great idea, though. I'll come now to Councillor Lorcan.
Thank you, and through your worship, I'm just wondering if it's possible, because it is so important, if we can have those slides back up on the live stream of the draft principles. I think we kind of, we didn't gloss over them, but I think particularly for the people that are watching by the live stream who perhaps are only listening or for who, reading or, it might be a bit difficult. I'm just wondering whether we can just take the time to just quickly itemise those principles and read them out. I'm happy to do that.
So just so you know, councillor, we're going to make these available on the website where the live stream sits. So we won't use our meeting time to story tell. This is for us to.
So this
to do
will
our
definitely be up.
But yes,
Thank you.
the reason why we're live streaming this is we want maximum transparency over this process. So
Thank you.
but appreciate you keeping the community in mind. Okay, so Councillor Ratcliffe, did you have another question? Councillor Ratcliffe, are you
Sorry.
there?
Yeah, sorry, I am here. I was just on a different screen. Yeah, just looking at the draft principles that we've got up there on slides 9 and 10. I'm a bit concerned that the principle about tutility is too soft. Tutility is a constitutional arrangement, not just a settlement obligation. I think that should be reflected in how we're viewing that principle. And the local voice principle, that should speak to protecting the community from concentration of power. We should be guaranteeing dispersal of power throughout our communities and not allowing it to be concentrated in Wellington or an ever decreasing number of councillors.
We'll take those notes away. Thank you, councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other feedback on those principles, team? As you will see, they align rather beautifully with community feedback so far. We will obviously have more community engagement, but it's a starting point. Okay, are there any other questions in general? I think my principal question to the officers, which has sort of come out of questioning that's been raised by elected members today, is real clarity over what we can assess now ahead of the Head Start and what we'll have to wait for detailed design. I think it would be really good to have that clarity at the next workshop, so that we're setting expectations about what can and can't be delivered within the timeframes, and also a clear understanding of the fact that there will be more work done and what that work is. Is there anything else? No, in which case we'll drop the, we'll keep the presentation up and I'll come to Wayne.
Thank you, Mayor Wendy. Really just that I think folds in nicely to next steps. I think it's been great to hear the conversation around the principles, and what I've taken out of this conversation is that, accepting that one or two particular points that were made, that broadly there's good comfort around the table around the Hawke's Bay principles, the fact that they link in nicely with the feedback received to date. So that's great. I'm keen to come back on the options again. There's been some useful discussion around particularly option 2 around the validity of it, but I haven't. With the exception perhaps of the point that Councillor Ratcliffe's made around the potential use of citizens' assemblies, which we'll take away to look at, haven't heard any other kind of broad options on this, and haven't heard at this point whether any of the options that are there should be taken on the table. So that is useful to know. And then, as noted on the slide there's really just a number of other steps in the process over the next few weeks, which will be important. And as the Mayor's highlighted, obviously there'll be further discussions around the table. So from my point of view, it's been a really useful discussion. It's been excellent to kind of hear all the questions and all the comments to provide a bit of richness to the conversation that we might not otherwise have. So thank you very much from my end, and Nigel's already highlighted that there are some further discussions at sort of CE and advisor level over the next little while before we come back to you.
Thank you, Wayne. And just reflecting back as well, one of the things I did hear was not a request for removal, but certainly some eyebrows raised around option 2, which is the split unitary authorities. There were a number of councillors who raised concerns it may not meet the criteria. So I think if that option is to be worked up and brought back to us, that we'd want some significant confidence that it is going to meet government's criteria. And just a personal reflection from me, just looking through the supporting documentation, I think it would be advantageous to avoid terms like local mayor. Actually, what we call and label people at this stage is not a requirement. What's a requirement is understanding high-level governance at the right time. To me, that doesn't, I think, lend itself well to a community dialogue. It almost reeks of patch protection, which is not what we're doing. So that's just a personal observation. Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Yep, just to your point on that option 2, is there any way where we can find out definitively, because it will save a lot of work if that's absolutely a no-goer?
I think you raise a good point, Deputy Mayor Fowler, especially given at the moment, unless we hear otherwise, we're all at a local level funding this work. Wayne, I put that to you.
It's a good question, but I think it's a tricky answer, because to some degree, I mean, there is the option that we would have of going to talk to DIA and potentially the minister to try and test it. Now, the level of, how definitive they might want to be is a separate question, but that would potentially be there. But we'll take it back and have the discussion about it. I don't know whether the minister at this point is necessarily going to want to be put in a position of kind of, ruling things in or out ahead of the Head Start process concluding on the 9th of August. But it's a fair point to raise.
Thank you, through Chair. If I just add to that, I mean, I think one thing that we can say already about that option is that it is certainly more complex, and that will come out in the assessment, and it's potentially higher cost because you've got different governance layers, and you would need a shared services arrangement because of the boundary catchment related issues. So it kind of fails on that catchment coherence, which is makes it rank quite poorly on that measure. But then even if you did do it, you would need some coherent, you'd need to resolve that coherence by having shared services. So it adds cost and adds complexity. So you can already see how it's actually starting to score poorly against some of those criteria.
Councillor Gibson.
Sorry, one more question. Has there been any work with Danny Burke and Woodville from Tauranga, essentially?
Yeah, great question. I might come to Wayne for that. Okay, sorry, we'll come to the Chief Executive.
Understand the position of Taradura at the moment is not to seek to join with Hawke's Bay.
So they went out for some high-level consultation with their community and have decided that no, they're not seeking that. We've also spoken informally with Gisborne, who have made an active decision as a unitary authority already not to participate in any Head Start system or proposal. So what they're saying is they're happy where they are. So we have explored our immediate neighbours. Are there any other questions? No, in which case, one last one from me. I think it was Councillor Milne raised a question around risks as we move forward. I'm really interested to understand, since the conversation around cost came up quite a bit here, and I understand we've got a limited ability to deep dive into that ahead of the 9th of August, but I think what would be helpful is under each option highlighting where there's a potential for financial risk. Yeah, and risks across the board, but particularly financial risk, particularly given things like I've been reflecting on recently. If Hawke's Bay was to move into one unitary authority, we do have different levels of service delivered across each council, across the region. To me, that presents a risk and how that might be navigated, but I think even just at a high level, noting those types of risks, just so we're going in informed. Councillor Milne.
Sorry, I have got one more question, if I may. So option 3, how will you assess that? Because in my mind, there's a few ways that could eventuate. Any ideas on that?
It's a tricky one to assess. No question. And so I think it's not going to meet a number of the criteria because it lacks coherence, it goes against economies of scale and da-da-da. So I think that option is going to score, in an objective sense, against the government criteria, is going to score quite poorly.
I guess though, if one of the council, if one of the councils decided that they wanted to go on another path, could that be more efficient practically and all of those type of things? Like potentially, maybe it actually does meet the criteria, but we won't know that at this point to be able to assess it if that's their indicate. I just.
It's a good question. We'll need to weigh up what assumptions we make about that option, and just speaking directly to it, does that option mean one of the council decides not to participate, but the other council say, well, hey, we're putting your name in the ring, in the mix, and if that's the option, then it looks much more like option one and would score well. But of course, you've got players who don't necessarily want to be at the table.
Sorry, and just, I know, dragging this out a little bit, but just for example, if we were looking at, where people are placed and the efficiencies, the lack of efficiencies, the catchments and all of those things, potentially it actually does become a more efficient unitary authority without one. I just think I would hate to not be looking at that level of assessment at this point and just be totally taking that off the table, I guess is,
Good questions.
Just when everyone thought they were that we were wrapping up the conversation, I am going to keep it going. Just looking at slide 17, which is the high-level governance for discussion. I have a personal view, and I'm interested in testing it, that E would lead to some negative outcomes. So E is the unitary authority, council plus local advisory boards. And what I mean by that, the reason why that one doesn't lend itself to me is it carries all the cost and staff requirements of having local boards, but them being purely advisory mutes their ability. And so in my personal view, I don't think that's a particularly positive outcome if we ended up in that type of situation. I'm more of a view that D would be a better fit in terms of, I'm not sure if I'm even looking at the right one there, but looking more at local boards having more decision-making authority if local boards were to exist. I'm not advocating for that specific, C, thank you, Deputy Mayor, you're right, I was looking at the wrong one. And I'm not necessarily advocating for that. I'm just saying if it was to be explored, it seems like a waste of resource to explore E. I don't think it would fly with anyone, but that is just my personal opinion. Councillor Nixon.
Actually, I think it should be in, even though I don't agree with it. And I think Councillor Gibson and I both asked questions relating to that. And I think the answer to those questions will tend to rule. I think we should rule it out on facts rather than predetermination.
So that's not being predetermined, Councillor Nixon. What I'm saying is we have limited staff resource, and as the Deputy Mayor's highlighted, we are funding every minute that's spent on this. So absolutely, if the council's of a mind that they want every option worked out, we will do that. What I'm saying is, to me, it looks like one that won't fly with the community feedback already and potentially not the government criteria. So I'm wondering whether or not we should spend time and resource on it.
Well, I sort of agree with you, but I still think that, if we're going to paint a picture, it's sort of got to have all the elements that people can say, no, I don't want that one. I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. You're allowed to be of that view. That's great. Councillor Milmine.
Thank you. I agree. I just think based on the community feedback that we have already received and the fact that local voice is really important. I mean, I don't think that really ticks that box. So I don't know if we need to work that up.
Thank you, Councillor Milmine. Councillor Noldo-Stick.
E looks to me sort of more or less what we have in the rural areas now, which while I'm very happy with the system, how it works, if we have a correspondingly smaller voice in a new system, perhaps it shouldn't be there.
Thank you, and that's important to hear from your rural voice on that, and thank you to both rural ward councillors now for raising that. Councillor Ratcliffe, I notice that you have your hand up, so we'll come to you.
Yes, thank you. Agreeing with the rural councillors there. There's a risk here with a ever decreasing number of councillors that you know, we've had a proposed model emailed to us all where Central Hawke's Bay, I think, gets one councillor. So I think ensuring that rural representation is really important. Also, I think if citizens' assemblies would count as advisory groups, then it might be worth exploring as well. And I feel like I might have actually taken that one off Gus's desk and put it on Wayne's in the last hour as well, if only partly.
Thank you, Councillor Ratcliffe. We don't have to remove it as an option that's worked up, but I am looking for a steer. If there's a general that's not really going to work for our community, then we can give that steer, but I'm not pressuring that team. Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Agree with you.
Okay. Can I have a wider steer? Because we've now got 4 voices. 5. Councillor Montepere-Hendry, do you have a view?
No, there's no point in having one if they don't have voting rights. I just picked up on that we shouldn't necessarily be using title mayor and doing an entire election again for a local mayor. So I think if you merged E to C, that it was local chairs and boards with voting rights, that might give you a solution.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, I just don't like the misuse of the mayors. Just a hell of a many mayors
Agreed.
just makes a mayor. What's the point of having a mayor if everyone's a mayor?
Totally agree. Councillor Nixon.
Don't we have to wait and see what the other councils say as well?
Well, what we're doing is we're providing our guidance, and then that will be brought together with the regional views, Councillor Nixon. So again, I'll just remind everyone, we're elected by Hastings here. We've always been a regional thinking council, but we are trying to work with our district's feedback and form our view, which will then be pulled together, and then we'll discuss what the regional view looks like. All right, does anyone object to us giving a steer that we don't think E is worth spending a lot of time on? I think that might be the easier question to ask. No, I'm not seeing any objections. So that's a steer for you from Hastings, Wayne. Thank you. Is there anything else that anyone else would like to raise or go through? Excellent. In which case, very sincere thanks, Wayne, to yourself and Lawrence for the mahi that you've been doing across the region. Huge thank you to our staff, our Chief Executive, and all of the officers who have been trying to pull this information together for us, very much directed by our directions. And as you can see, we get to control the options and we are morphing them as we go. But ultimately it will come back to our community as well. Our community have given us an initial steer, but there's more conversations to be had. So on that note, can I please ask someone to volunteer to do our closing karakia, please? Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. If you could turn on your microphone, please.
Kia ora. E te pāpā e te matua, nau mai tō ihi tō wehi tō kaha ki roto e te whare o te krauni here. Anei mātou e whakawhetai ana kia koe te atua, te kaihanga o ngā mea katoa. Arahi mai ki tō mātauranga, uhia mai ngā hua ki roto I te ingoa ahu kraiti. Lord, guide us, let your presence, your humility and your wisdom prevail for the people, by the people, of the people. Amen.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe, and thank you for anyone who has tuned in to watch this workshop. This is the first of many.